Salamone, the podcast, presents A Lover's Guide to the Never-Ending Apocalypse, Part 2, The Media and Military-Industrial Complexities. Welcome to Salamone. I'm Michael Salamone. This is part 2 of our year-end series, A Lover's Guide to the Never-Ending Apocalypse. Last week we looked at fundamentalism and the religious beliefs behind the drums beating for a war between the West and Islam. Both Hillary and Republicans, as well as the death cult known as ISIS, want it, but we should try to stop them from getting it. Standing in our way is the brainwashing Americans are susceptible to from the media and the military-industrial complexes. You see, both would benefit from a crusade. That's why your TVs and radios are trying to brainwash you into a deep fear and support of military action. That's why the stocks in weapons manufacturers have been skyrocketing since the Paris attacks. That's why part 2 of our series is entitled The Media and Military-Industrial Complexities. President Dwight D. Eisenhower warned us to beware of the military-industrial complex famously. The internet is bountiful with conspiracy theories surrounding this corporate cabal, and many of the most ridiculous have actually been proven true. We begin with one such theory that was information, as information became public, we eventually learned was true. Operation Northwoods. In the early 1960s, America's top military leaders reportedly drafted plans to kill innocent people and commit acts of U.S. terrorism in U.S. cities, to create public support for a war against Cuba. The plans were developed as a way to trick the American public and the international community into supporting a war to oust Cuba's then new leader, communist Fidel Castro. President Kennedy stopped Operation Northwoods from going into effect. He was dead the next year. So I'm not saying Operation Northwoods or something similar was ever implemented. I'm just saying, over 50 years ago, the government almost did. Using fear for manufactured terrorism is something that's already been considered. When we look around the world we live in and we see domestic terrorism ignored, like Dylan Roof or Sandy Hook, we don't act on those. We don't go after fundamentalists and racists in our country. We don't go after people who shoot up a classroom full of children. But we do go after the scary, unknown, slightly brown guy when he commits an act of terrorism. In the 1950s, during congressional hearings, it was revealed that the CIA was planting news stories to control public opinion in the United States. The Pentagon Military Analyst Program was a propaganda campaign of the U.S. Department of Defense that was launched in early 2002 by then Assistant Secretary of Defense for Public Affairs, Victoria Clark. The goal of that operation was to, quote, spread the administration's talking points on Iraq by briefing retired commanders for network and cable television appearances, end quote. On those networks, they were presented as independent analysts, though they were anything but. Though that program was discontinued, it shows that these tactics have continuously been in play. Former Nixon administration CIA Director William Colby famously once said, "The CIA owns everyone of any significance within the major media." William Casey, describing his job as CIA Director in the Reagan administration, famously said, "We'll know our disinformation program is complete when everything the American public believes is false." Former President Harry S. Truman said, "I never would have agreed to the formulation of the Central Intelligence Agency back in '47 if I had known it would become the American Gestapo." Before he died, FBI Chief J. Edgar Hoover described it all by saying, The individual is handicapped by coming face to face with a conspiracy so monstrous he cannot believe it exists. Perhaps the most damning quote is former president and former CIA director and agent as well, George Herbert Walker Bush, who said, "If the American people knew what we have done, they would string us up from the lampposts." And of course, President Kennedy, before his assassination, described his dream for the United States by saying, "I will splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it into the winds." One last quotation before I move forward from John Swinton, former New York Times chief of staff, who said, "There is no such thing as this date in world history in America as independent press. You know it and I know it. There's not one of you who dares to write your honest opinions, and if you did, you know beforehand that it would never appear in print. I am paid weekly for keeping my honest opinion out of the paper I am connected with. Others of you are paid similarly weekly salaries for these things. And any of you who would be so foolish as to write honest opinions would be out on the streets looking for another job. If I allowed my honest opinions to appear in one issue of my paper, before 24 hours my occupation would be gone. The business of the journalist is to destroy truth, to lie outright, to pervert, to vilify, to fawn at the feet of Mammon, and to sell his country and his race for his daily bread. You know it and I know it, and what folly is this toasting the independent press? We are the tools and vassals of rich men behind the scenes. We are the jumping jacks. They pull the strings and we dance. Our talents, our possibilities, and our lives are the property of other men. We are intellectual prostitutes." Organizations like Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting have accused the military-industrial media complex of using media resources to promote militarism, which, of course, according to Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting's hypothesis, benefits the defense resources of the company. For instance, General Electric, which owned NBC up until cable and inter-Nazi provider Comcast divested them of it. General Electric is a subcontractor for the Tomahawk cruise missile, the Patriot II missile, manufactures components for the B-2 stealth bomber and the B-52 bomber, and the E-3 AWACS aircraft. So obviously, NBC supported the wars in Iraq. Now you see the irony of their slogan about bringing good things to life. I could fill hours on examples and exposés about how the media and military-industrial complex work in concert, selling public opinion to foreign policy. And without even mentioning Fox News' constant exploitation of their viewers. But you're a smart group. If you really want to learn about the topic, go to Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting's website. It's fair.org. Or just search the topic. There have been independent stories and documentaries on this topic for decades. The Freedom of Information Act and confessions of people like I quoted earlier have brought many elements of this Orwellian power structure to light. But with that said, I'd like to look at the media reporting we've seen since the attacks on Paris and other cities this month. The media told us about the attack on Paris. Social media told us there were other cities too. The mainstream media told us these were Muslim attackers, likely from Syria or Libya. The truth is, all of these terrorists were citizens of the European Union. The media put the spotlight on Americans who were afraid of accepting refugees, ignoring voices who were calling for showing compassion. The media put the spotlight on politicians spewing far-right hate speech to close places of worship and to tag a minority group like animals. The media gave voice to politicians calling for endless war against the largest religion on the planet. While the internet erupted with cheers for Bernie Sanders' speech on social democracy and a sound foreign policy rooted in social justice, the mainstream media followed people like Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, who called for perpetual warfare. This isn't to say there isn't legitimate media sources out there. The Intercept's Glenn Greenwald did a brilliant round with Amy Goodman on Democracy Now!, talking about these very issues, how war hawks are going after encryption to further degrade the privacy of American and world citizens and journalists. and the financial gains a handful of major corporations will make off of this never-ending war. But if you're listening to this broadcast, you know all about the value of embracing independent sources for information. Hopefully you're sharing journalism like the fine work that's being done at The Intercept with your family and friends, because we all need to see the alternatives to the corporate-controlled media. Only a handful of corporations own all of the major media in the United States. We see personalities marketed more than the facts. We are given a narrative to accept. Independent journalism is more important than ever. Joining me this week is a former soldier turned political activist and a dear friend for over 20 years now, Jay Burbank. Jay has been a great voice for veteran issues and is an active leader on the grassroots campaign for Bernie Sanders that started in Colorado independent of the actual Sanders campaign. I spoke to Jay on the telephone. The rest of this broadcast is that conversation.
Jay, thanks so much for taking time to speak with me today. Our topic this week is the media, military, industrial complexities. So I'll start right where my editorial just left off. Do you think the media is beating the war drums right now?
You know, I get that feeling from a lot of other people, but to be honest, this year is the year that I decided to stop watching TV media. You know, some will come across on my Facebook feed and whatnot. I'll watch clips here and there of things, but because I don't have it constantly on and the news cycle telling me what I should be worried about for that day, I find like my anxiety has gone down a lot, and I don't have this kind of over my head now. I'm an Iraq vet. I was in the Army Infantry the first year of Operation Iraqi Freedom, and I remember the lead up to it was just constant. But that's at that time, that's all people had was TV, and they were watching everything that Saddam was doing and how he was the evil enemy for sure of the year. And so right now I look at, you know, the ISIS thing and I say, what happened to Al Qaeda? And I know Al Qaeda's still there and they're still bad and all that, but it just when the media finds the bad guy, man, they can really drum it up quick. And who is gaining from this? What did we gain from Iraq? What did the American people gain? They paid for a huge war that has created ISIS, and the war profiteers, you know, are just sitting back laughing again. And here we go all over again, right before another presidential election.
As someone who's addicted to news, I'm really curious about what led you to cut out mainstream media. It sounds like heaven.
Well, to be honest, running around after a couple kids, I don't have the time anymore. And I also cut the cable. So, you know, we use Netflix and Roku and whatnot for our TV entertainment. And the more I've been away from it, the more I realize how much entertainment is involved in news. And I never really had a huge feeling that there was a media bias until I did this, and frankly until the Bernie Sanders campaign. You know, where I see a candidate that really lines up with the American people, but every single issue that they bring up with him, they try to peg him as this kind of fringe candidate, which he really isn't. He's a populist more than anything. And so that's made me kind of step back and look at all the coverage that goes on. And then, you know, 2 weeks ago we were worried about red cups. You know, now we're talking about refugees and what's it going to be next week, you know, and it just, how much of people's energy and time is wasted on this thing. But there's the danger, of course, of going to war again. And the media is supposed to be playing a role in questioning going to war instead of beating the war drum. And they obviously did that in our last conflicts. They went right along with whatever the administration was feeding them. And for them to be doing it again is pretty sickening, and it also shows how they're on the decline as well. You know, they're losing their viewership left and right to people finding on the internet things that matter to them and that they feel have more integrity. And so it's almost like the baby, or it's almost like in its last throes, you know, where they're just going full out, as much fear and just trying to scare people again. It seems like to fire off a bunch of $1 million missiles. So
yeah. This weekend, you're probably not aware of this story since you're not paying attention to the mainstream stuff, but CNN suspended one of their personalities for a tweet that was basically in support of the U.S. accepting refugees. I won't get it perfect, and I don't have it in front of me, but more or less when Congress passed the anti-refugee bill, she tweeted something like the Statue of Liberty was hanging her head low. To me, that story kind of sums up how we're being told to think on this issue. Assuming that you're just hearing that news, what's your reaction to how CNN would suspend somebody over a tweet like that?
Yeah, it's funny. I know a little bit about that story because it came across my news feed, and that's on my Facebook, and that's what floors me, is that people are watching the media more than ever and questioning them, and for them to do something like that where someone's just straight up giving their opinion when most of their news now is all opinions, you know. When we were kids, we sat down at night and watched the nightly news, and it was kind of laid out more as fact. And so I watched these 24-hour news programs, and yeah, there's a few facts in there, but then they have these people on that give these wild opinions. And I think a lot of Americans are taking that as fact. And so it floors me, the crazy things that people say all day long on these channels. And one tweet goes out, and it wasn't even anything inflammatory, and she lost her job over it. It puts even more of a microscope on how they are forming their personalities and their story, and feeding us all with it.
I couldn't agree more that the 24-hour news cycles are driven by media personalities and not journalists. But, yeah, it just, to me, seems like they're pushing the narrative so hard that personality that can't get behind it isn't going to have a voice on CNN. Now, you're an activist for Bernie Sanders for president. How does it make you feel that Hillary Clinton's vision for war has been dominating the press this week over Bernie Sanders' moderate foreign policy on the issue?
It's really just disheartening. You know, I got involved with Bernie because he was the chairman of the Veterans Committee in the Senate, and that's when I was noticing this guy really making sense about a lot of things, and he's not a warmonger at all. I wouldn't call him a pacifist either, but to see someone who, you know, definitely believes in using war as a last resort, still caring so much about veterans' issues, just, to me, showed me his integrity right off the bat, without knowing a single other issue. And yes, now I align myself with all of his issues, the way he sees it. And to hear Hillary doing this to differentiate herself from Bernie, it proves to me how far to the right the party has gone. She voted for the Iraq War, and now she says that was a mistake. We all know why she did it. It was for politics at the time. It was political suicide to vote against it. And that's not a leader. That's not courage to me. You know, Bernie's been there all along, right, on all these issues. And he had courage to vote that way. And he was rewarded when his constituents kept him in office and said, heck yeah, you didn't go with what's popular, but you went with what you believed in. And guess what? You were right most of the time. And so to hear her do this and really not be thinking about the consequences and by the way, not really doing much for the veterans that are already coming back. We're going to have a serious crisis in this country if the veterans are kept to be treated this way. First off, you're not going to incentivize anybody to join the military if they're seeing veterans come home without jobs and really pissed off. And then second off, I mean, we're losing all these really skilled, just great people in our workforce that could be doing great things, leading great charges, that are sitting on the sidelines, a lot of them, and are disillusioned. And I look at groups like IAVA, the Iraq Afghanistan Veterans Association, and they are in government trying to make a difference. But I see the door keep getting slammed in their face over and over and over. And to me, it blows me away. This is not a partisan issue at all. And to just go blindly into another conflict, which is really, really complicated conflict. I mean, the Syrian conflict, there's a lot of moving pieces there. And just to kind of Toby Keith bomb the world to hell type style. The American people are sick of it, and they've been sold it before, and I think they're a little more leery now to do it again.
Yeah, I would hope so, because we've seen what happens, but what you mentioned, what's going on with taking care of our veterans, I see, especially in right-wing news, a big skirting over of what's really happening with that issue. I see that it's really a GOP-led Congress that keeps blocking vet bills, but meanwhile, on things like Fox News, they're trying to spin the refugee issue to being like, well, we should take care of our veterans first, like it's an either-or situation, which I don't understand.
And I have gone off on Facebook about these memes that I see that, how can we take care of refugees when we can't take care of our veterans? How can we take care of refugees when we have our own homeless on the street? And to me, I just think every day there is a chance for whoever puts this meme up to do something for veterans. Every day they could help a homeless person. And to politicize these things and pit them against each other, I mean, it goes to the whole myth that we can't afford the programs that we have in this country. And so any other little program coming in, and we've already been doing the refugee program for years, and we have plenty of money for it, and it's never been an issue before. But to pit different issues against each other, I think it's insulting as a veteran, because everyone waves their flag and says, you're the reason we're free, and thank you so much, and all these things. And I'll put a little yellow ribbon on my car. But by the way, I'm also going to elect people into office that don't do shit for you, and just continue to do that. But then I'll get upset about it when politically it suits me. It's really brought veterans issues to the forefront in a way, to say, yeah, why aren't we helping these people? And yeah, we could do that all the time. Every year there are bills that don't get passed. A lot of them supported by veterans groups, and they just hang their head because it shouldn't be partisan at all.
Yeah. You touched on Bernie Sanders a bit, a subject I know you're quite passionate about, and I believe, how do I say this? I believe Bernie Sanders has been the victim of unfair media coverage ever since he announced. And the Democratic National Committee, who accepts money from the media, Wall Street, arms manufacturers, I believe they've conspired to limit debates and keep the debates they are allowing to times that people won't be watching television. And I believe that's all about keeping Bernie from introducing himself to middle America. With many of those DNC donors I just mentioned also being Hillary Clinton donors, predominantly CNN, whose parent company is, I think, her fifth largest donor, I believe mainstream media is in cahoots to deliver this election to her. Any thoughts on that?
Without a doubt. I listen to a lot of the speeches, and the headlines that come out of them really are trying to make him sound like a fringe candidate. And though I don't watch the TV media as much, I've noticed within our Bernie groups on Facebook even, we started getting attacked by Hillary trolls, which means we're doing something right, but it's pretty obvious when they come in, and I really see how they're trying to make us all sound like lunatics, because Bernie fans are really passionate because they see the world kind of in a different way, and what they feel is a really honest way, really. And to have kind of a troll come in and cite things with our kind of members of our groups and things, it's unbelievable how much all that money can really permeate a lot of things. And it shows that Bernie is getting a lot of traction, unlike what you see. The national campaign has come out to Colorado and just to meet us, because they're wondering, how are you guys doing this? Who is helping you? We haven't helped you at all, but you're doing all these great things, without any money at all. And Citizens United, I think, is going to go down as maybe one of the best things that ever happened to this country, because the enough and enough is enough drumbeat that we keep hearing is really kind of taking hold, and people are getting fired up, and they're watching the way they've been fed all these things in different ways. And so this campaign is more than about Bernie and Hillary and whatnot. I really see if Hillary does end up getting the nomination, and right now it looks like she'd walk into the presidency, considering the other side and their options. I really believe if that happens, she will be challenged by her own party in 4 years. And this movement is gaining a lot of traction. It's easy to see how it could happen as the Tea Party took over the Republican Party and pretty much took over government in a lot of ways, and how easy it was for them to move in and do that based on an entirely different set of ideals. And so this kind of Bernie movement that's going on is really, they needed a leader to rally behind. Elizabeth Warren is one, and so is Bernie, and this kind of Occupy movement that had been started is really gaining traction now, and the pendulum has swung too far, and we're gonna change the Democratic Party back to a progressive party. That really is the goal.
I'm working on a piece that will be on Daily Costs and the Elizabethan next week on exactly that, how the Bernie revolution is going to change, no matter what happens, the face of the Democratic Party forever. I think it's more than what the Tea Partiers went through because they were, citizens, but they were funded by like the Koch brothers and things like this.
Definitely.
Where the Sanders revolution really was born out of Occupy, in my humble opinion, just because I'm aware of so many Occupy people who went on to either push for Run, Warren, Run, or to get on board with the Sanders campaign even before he announced. And it's going to change the face of the Democratic Party because Citizens United is a key issue uniting us all on this revolution that we've got to get money out of politics. And if the Democratic establishment succeeds, well, then all this oligarchy that Bernie and Jimmy Carter have been warning us about is probably going to take a stronger foothold, and progressives are going to leave the Democratic Party, which
it's true.
Only wins when there's good voter turnout.
And that's exactly it. And as more and more Americans are identifying as independents, I meet so many independents that come to the canvassing that we do, the caucus training that we do, and they have all become Democrats to vote for Bernie, and bringing in that independent voice is just going to be such a powerful thing for the party as a whole once they kind of let it take hold. A lot of these people that I talk to don't have a job, are in between jobs, don't really have a steady, solid career, and they've been sold the American dream, but they've never really gotten to taste it. And in a way, it's going to make it a lot harder for the movement, because you have people that are trying to scrape by and work every job that they can to get ahead in the littlest bit that they can. And so they don't have as much time to work on these political campaigns and being a part of the party and whatnot. Whereas on the other side, when the Tea Party took over, you're right, they had the Coke money behind them. And so they had the time. the money equaled time for them to go out and do these things. And so it's amazing how fast this has taken hold, and the crescendo of it has been extremely steep. But it is going to take some time to really, at a local level, starting at a local level, and just keep working your way up to find candidates that are part of this movement.
I read a thing on Reddit last week about how it was a confession from someone who was a paid Hillary troll, like you mentioned. Her job was to do exactly what you talked about, go into Facebook groups that support Bernie and stir up trouble, or one of the things I get a lot, even death threats from Hillary trolls on Twitter.
That's a progressive way of thinking.
Yeah, but that's progressive, yeah. So with the media establishment trying to force feed us a Clinton presidency and ignoring the Sanders revolution, which really is, after a lifetime of being active and covering politics, I've never seen anything as strong, grassroots, and ready to fight as I have. But still the media tells us it's nothing, ignores the fact that Clinton is doing this, attacking progressive values and progressives in the party, and that there is a rift in the party. The media pushing that Clinton presidency, what does that say about these war drums beating that we're hearing now, and how do you imagine those issues are tied together?
You know, when you're out canvassing, a lot of people, their first issue with Bernie is electability, you know, and I think the Democratic Party now is tapping into some of that fear-mongering that's gone on the other side for years and saying, wow, this stuff works pretty well, you know, and if we could convince people that, yeah, maybe they don't trust Hillary at all. Many Democrats don't. But maybe they'll just feel safer, and they'll feel more comfortable knowing, you know, that somebody that's been there and done that will be at the helm again. And I really think that's what is at the bottom of it is scaring people into thinking that the easier choice is the better choice, you know.
As someone who is served on the front lines in the infantry, what do you hope most that decision makers are considering in their own hearts and minds in regards to foreign policy right now?
It goes back to your brothers out there, you know, in the infantry. It was all men, and knowing each one of their stories, each one of their backgrounds, where they came to come do these things. And I read a great article recently of a veteran, and it was a really raw article about what they thought about war and whatnot. And the best line I took from it was that every person who signs up for the military thinks that they're going to be Luke Skywalker, you know, and they're going to do all this good and they're going to be the hero. But then they get over there and they look around and they start thinking, holy shit, I might just be another stormtrooper. And to come home thinking that too, that, wow, I'm just part of this big thing that I shouldn't really even be part of. When we were over there, I mean, we were sitting on a oil refinery, and I'll never forget that because they had air conditioning, there were these white SUVs that showed up, and a big old red Halliburton sign on the side, and they wanted to take pictures of us, and they're smiling, and they're the happiest dudes in the world, right? And at that moment, I think I was already thinking that way a little bit. It solidified it for me, but it also showed a lot of my brothers, like, wow, what really are we doing this for, And so the question was, what should Congress, what should lawmakers think about now? Just think about the true cost of war, and who is really profiting and who is really benefiting from war. And it's not just losing our own. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Iraqis have been killed over there. You can't really tell me that there was that many, quote, bad guys over there. And so the true cost of war, it's a lot more, I think, than the political cycle takes into account. And we've seen it with our Vietnam vets, and now we're going to see another generation of vets dealing with the true cost.
I think that's, at the end, you hit on my biggest fear about American culture is we should have learned this lesson with Korea. We should have learned this lesson with Vietnam. We should have learned this lesson with the first Gulf War. Here we are, another Gulf War, into that same very lesson and considering doing it all over again.
Yeah, when I first came home, I ended up in L.A. somehow. I was sitting in a bar next to a guy, and he was a Vietnam vet, and I told him, I just gotten home, and and he went into a whole long diatribe of everything he went through in Vietnam, and it was horrific. It was nothing like my experience at all. It was just, I was getting emotional listening to it. And then when he was done, I said, okay, like how do you deal with that? How did you tell your family, How did you tell your friends that don't understand why you're different now? And he told me that I was the first one he had ever told any of that to. And he said, let that be a lesson to you, because the rest of the country didn't learn their lesson. He said, your job is to not shut up. Your job is to just keep talking about it and let people know the true cost of war. And ever since then, I haven't shut up. And that's probably why I'm on your show today.
Well, yes, but so much more than that, because we've been friends over 20 years now. Even before these serious issues came into play into our lives, I've always considered you a thoughtful and reasonable person. So it's good to discuss things like this with you. I guess I'll just ask you for any final thoughts on the subject of media influence or the military-industrial complex, or just anything you would like listeners to keep in mind as these topics are at the forefront of our foreign policy discussion these days.
I would say follow the money, and I touched on it earlier. Who really is benefiting, and just really question why we're getting involved in these things when we have so many of our own problems at home. That's about all I can say about that.
Well, my thanks to my dear friend who became a soldier and then turned into a great activist, Mr. Jay Burbank, as well as my thanks to those of you who've tuned into this broadcast. Next week, we'll continue the Lover's Guide to the Never-Ending Apocalypse series with a segment on racism and xenophobia. Until then, I'm Michael Salamone, reminding you to please be good to each other. Cheers.
Salamone is a podcast taped live for a streaming internet audience. Find episodes and archives on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, all of the places you get podcasts these days, and of course at michaelsalamone.com. I really think you should subscribe.